Hey guys, so in this video we are going to start chapter 4. This is going to be the very first section on the tissue level of organization, the different types of tissues, which we kind of mentioned way back in I think chapter 1, but we're going to go through it. That is what this chapter is for. So tissues, we mentioned in the level of organization, there was chemical level, cellular level, and then above that, cellular level was the smallest level of all life. Then above that is tissues, where we're going to take different types of cells and put them together, and they're all going to have a similar structure, function, work together in a tissue type. If you want to study tissues, it is called histology, study of tissues. Different types of tissues. There are 4 major categories that we mentioned before. There is epi, there is nervous, there is muscle, and there is connective tissue. So most of y'all have started doing the lab modules for this week, which is great, and we are knocking these out. Nervous tissue is just like it sounds. It is going to be the neurons and their associated helper cells, the glial cells, that help with communication. Your central nervous system and your peripheral nervous system, all those neurons and their helper cells are nervous tissue. Muscle tissue is going to be broken down into the 3 categories of cardiac, your heart muscle. Your skeletal muscle helps you move and get around. I had PT this morning, so skeletal muscle is what I've been working on my whiplash. And then we have smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is, we'll talk about the differences in those guys, but we'll talk about voluntary and involuntary. Smooth muscle is involuntary. It's going to be in hollow organs and places like your GI tract, moving your food along through your GI tract, your blood vessels, to have them dilate, vasodilate, or vasoconstrict. That's smooth muscle. So those are the 3 types of muscle tissue in that category of muscles. So we knocked out nervous, we knocked out muscles. We have epithelial tissue, and they are going to be your liners. They're going to cover exposed surfaces, whether that is the skin on the outside of your body or an exposed surface where we talked about your GI tract, like eating things. You're basically a giant tube going through your body. So that open area in the tube is called a lumen, and the exposed surface is going to be covered in epi. Same thing with inside of your blood vessels, and all of those things that are hollow are going to have epi lining those exposed surfaces. So those are epi. They're always going to be on the outside, on the surface of whatever that surface might be. Underneath epi is connective. It's going to fill that space, the gap. They provide structural support and energy. It's kind of a catch-all group. There's dense regular and dense irregular and liquid. Different cartilages are in here, bones in here. It's really a catch-all category in the connective tissue type. Those are the 4 categories: muscle, nervous, epi, and connective tissues. The stem cells, I'm not sure if it is going to switch over for us on our thing. Let me switch it again, get it back. Stem cells, we are going to have one big cell that makes all the other cells, right? And we mentioned this before, we mentioned it a few times. It is the zygote. It is when the egg gets fertilized by the nucleus, and both by the nucleus. When the egg gets fertilized by the sperm and both nuclei fuse, you have the zygote. And that is the one stem cell that makes all the other stem cells. Since it is the one cell that makes all the others, it is called totipotent. Totipotent makes all of them, totipotent stem cells. After that, we're going to break up into the 3 germ layers that we mentioned before: endo on the inside, ecto on the outside, and meso in the middle. So those are going to be pluripotent because they are still stem cells, but they'll only do their category. They're only going to produce endoderm, or they're only going to produce ectoderm. So they're a little less. They're not as totipotent. They're pluripotent, individual germ-line stem cells. And then we got the multipotent stem cells. They're even more restrictive. They're only in charge of their one thing. Like they're only going to make skin tissue and that's like what they're going to do. So we can go from totipotent that does it all, pluripotent that's a little more restrictive, and the multipotent stem cells are the more restrictive out of those. Cell differentiation, we mentioned every single cell is the same DNA, unless we're talking about eggs and sperm because they have half the DNA. But all the other somatic cells in your body have all the same DNA, and it differentiates when we turn on and turn off the genes, gene expression. So again, everything comes from the one zygote, that one totipotent stem cell that makes everything. Then it undergoes cleavage, 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 and those will then become the different germ layer stem cells that we mentioned before that were pluripotent, and they will differentiate into the different cell types within the different germ layers of the different cell types, which we will need to know here, and we will mention more again when we get into the human development chapter later on at the end of the textbook in AP2. But again, endoderm is going to be on the inside, GI tract, lining of the GI tract, parts of the respiratory, GI tract accessory glands, like the pancreas. Those are endo. So the furthest inside you can go. If we're a giant donut, that tube, the GI tract, is the endoderm. And then a few other things coming off of that, parts of the respiratory, accessory organs, stuff like that. Ectoderm, furthest outside you can go. So that's going to be your epidermis, your skin. And then it's also going to include the CNS and PNS, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, your nervous system plus your skin. And why does that happen? Because this primitive area right here is some of the primitive streak, and everything in blue is ectoderm, and you can see how the ectoderm kind of infolds in. When it starts to infold in, it's going to make the neural tube. So that neural tube forms with the ectoderm, and your neural tube is the beginning of central nervous system, and then off of that peripheral nervous system. So your nervous system is lumped in with the ectoderm. That's why, if you think that sounds weird and that they're in different places, it's going to include skin, hair, nails, that stuff, and also nervous system. Mesoderm, everything in between ectoderm and the endoderm, pretty much. Bones, muscles, blood, circulatory system, all that stuff is mesoderm. So know your three germ layers, know roughly the body parts in general. Skin, ecto, GI tract, endo, muscles, meso, that kind of stuff. Know the different germ layers. More pictures of what you're going to find in the ecto, meso, and endoderms. The membranes are one more thing that we need to go over in this section. So there are different tissue membranes. There are mucous membranes, there are serous membranes, and there are cutaneous and synovial. So let's go through each one of these individually. On the mucous membranes, they are going to line the tissue passages. We mentioned this in one of our class meetings, I think Wednesday. Last week, we mentioned the different types of connective tissue and how you could see a mucous membrane because when you look on the lab handouts, you can see goblet cells. So these guys are going to be the moist passages in your body, whether that's respiratory, whether it's GI tract, reproductive also has mucous membranes. So they are going to line passageways open to the exterior of the body, digestive, respiratory system, repro, oh, I forgot, I left off urinary tract. I kind of lump that all in, but urinary tract, they are going to be lubricated by mucus, hence the name mucous membranes, and they are going to be kept moist. Part of that respiratory tract, and those mucous membranes helps capture the dust particles, and so we could capture those and get them out. So they are going to have areolar connective tissue underneath this that supports this, but the mucous membranes are going to be made out of epithelial tissue. So whether that is simple columnar on the GI tract, or we go from our pseudostratified columnar in our trachea, but these are mucous membranes and they are epi-type tissue. Serous membranes, they are going to have, it's going to be meso, okay, good, it's still sharing on the thing. It's going to be mesothelium, similar, just supported by areolar connective. These are not going to be connected to the outside serous membranes. These are inside. These are going to be, I talked about bags that go around stuff. These are the serous membranes. So the bag that goes around the heart, pericardium, the bag that goes around your lungs. Each lung has a bag around it because, again, your lungs are inflating, deflating, inflating, deflating, and you need a membrane, a bag around those things. So that's the pleura. And then around your gut. So it doesn't include every single thing in your abdominopelvic cavity, but it includes a large majority of it. Your large intestine, small intestine is going to be lumped together in a cavity called your peritoneum, and you will have this peritoneum sac around those areas, and it will be filled with serous fluid, hence it's called serous membrane. So the bag around the heart, bag around the lungs, and the bag around your intestines are all different types of serous membranes filled with watery fluid that help protect those areas. Cutaneous membranes, these are going to be, when you think of cutaneous, I hope you're thinking of skin. That's going to be our next chapter later. So it's going to be stratified squamous. When we talk about epi, this is epithelium outside. So your skin epi is stratified squamous. You are undergoing abrasion and being exposed to all sorts of things. So you need a really thick layer of stratified squamous epithelium. Your skin is not moist normally, right? It's not, unless you're hot and you're sweating or something like that. It's typically dry. So it's going to be thick. It's usually dry and waterproof. So we're going to have keratin in our stratified squamous cells. We'll talk about that in the next video when we talk about the individual types of epi. But it will be dry. It will be relatively waterproof. We don't want water soaking in and getting out easy. And the fact that it's dry also helps cut down on bacteria growth, which is good. We don't want bacteria growing all over our place. We want to kind of control what lives in places. All right, the last membrane is synovial membrane. It's got synovial in there. I want you to think of joints. Synovial joints have fluid inside of them. So they're some of our most movable joints. So your shoulder and your knee have synovial joints in them, and that helps in your free movable joints. It helps lubricate the joint cavity. Here we go, lubricating the joint cavity. There we go. With the fluid in there, with that synovial fluid in that joint. So those are the different types of membranes. Know your different membranes: synovial, cutaneous, serous, the bags around things, and mucous membranes that are made out of epi that are going to be slimy, for a better word, mucousy, because they have the goblet cells in all of those mucous membranes. Any membrane that's moist and exposed to outside surfaces, mucous membrane. So those are the 4 different mucous membranes. And then the next video, we'll go through epi, because epi is kind of extensive. So we'll go through that in the next video.